Everyone thinks of the 1849 California gold rush as a story of fortune and adventure. But the truth most history books hide is far darker. Entire indigenous communities were destroyed. Thousands perished from violence and disease, and most miners returned home with nothing. Today, we uncover the hidden side of the gold rush, the part they didn't teach you in school. It was 1849. Dreams of gold drew thousands west, crossing deserts, rivers, and mountains. Ships, wagons, and footpaths carried men, women, and families hoping for instant wealth. Towns like San Francisco exploded overnight, a land of opportunity for some, but a nightmare for many others. Beneath the glittering promises lay unimaginable hardships. Lawlessness ran rampant. Vigilante gangs terrorized immigrants. Disease and malnutrition claimed lives faster than gold could be found. And for the indigenous populations, the arrival of miners was catastrophic. Entire communities lost, their land stolen, their culture under siege. Most people will never hear these stories. But in the next few minutes, we'll reveal the hidden realities, the greed, and the human cost of the California gold rush. Truths that textbooks left buried. By the end, you'll see why the story of 1849 is far more than a tale of gold. In an era when words traveled slowly and news arrived on creaking horse-drawn carriages or steamships, a single letter could hold the power to reshape lives. The letter that changed everything arrived in an unassuming envelope, its handwriting precise and deliberate. Its content promised opportunity, warning, or revelation that would ripple through every aspect of existence. For some, it was a key. For others, a mirror reflecting mistakes and miscalculations. This is the story of that letter, the afternoon it arrived, and the transformation it ignited. The setting was a small, dusty town bordered by rolling hills and narrow rivers. Life was routine, the days predictable, and the future seemingly fixed. Families worked farms, ran shops, or labored in nearby industries. The arrival of the letter disrupted this order. Its arrival was neither ceremonious nor announced, no trumpet of fanfare or eager messenger, but when it was recognized, a hush fell. The envelope held more than paper. It carried the weight of destiny. The recipient, accustomed to the rhythms of ordinary life, sensed immediately that this communication was unlike others. A twist of anxiety, a heartbeat accelerated, and a pause before breaking the seal. The hand trembled slightly, the mind racing to anticipate content. Was it fortune, warning, or loss? Each possibility brought its own cascade of implications. As the paper unfolded, the words inscribed revealed more than mere information. They contained directives, requests, or news of opportunity that demanded immediate action. The letter connected distant people and places, bridging gaps in geography and circumstance. It promised changes that could not be ignored. The recipient understood instinctively that life as it had been known would no longer exist beyond this point. Family members and neighbors gathered, drawn by curiosity and concern. The letter's presence transformed domestic space into a chamber of decision. Conversations circled the implications. The words demanded interpretation, negotiation, and planning. The letter's authority was unquestioned, its impact immediate. Choices were no longer hypothetical. They became concrete, urgent, and personal. Preparation followed. Decisions had to be made about travel, communication, and financial commitments. Resources were marshaled. plans that had been dormant for years were suddenly activated. The community, once content with routine, shifted into motion. The letter acted as a catalyst, altering not only the recipient's trajectory, but also the lives of everyone connected to them. Travel and correspondence followed. Roads were mapped, carriages readied, and ships booked. Messages were sent in return, coordinating responses with distant relatives, business partners, or associates. Each action had consequences, cascading outward. Every choice influenced outcomes, and the recipient felt the heavy responsibility of interpreting instructions accurately. Challenges emerged immediately. Obstacles in communication, unforeseen expenses, and unexpected delays tested patience. The letter's promises were contingent on timely action and comprehension. Misinterpretation could lead to failure. Attention to detail, judgment, and resilience became critical. The recipient learned to navigate bureaucratic and practical hurdles, guided by the written word that had arrived unexpectedly. As days progressed, the ripple effect extended. Friends, colleagues, and family adjusted their own routines in response to the recipient's new trajectory. The letter, once a solitary communication, had expanded into a social event, influencing behavior across multiple households and communities. Conversations, debates, and advice circulated, reflecting the letter's capacity to provoke thought and action beyond its immediate context. The letter also carried emotional weight. It evoked joy, anxiety, hope, and fear. Memories were recalled, regrets considered, and aspirations re-examined. Decisions made in its wake were infused with intensity. The recipient grappled with moral, financial, and social implications. Even small choices, what to pack, whom to notify, which route to take, were loaded with significance, magnified by the letter's authority. Eventually, the consequences of the letter manifested in tangible results. Travel led to new opportunities or encounters. Negotiations concluded. Business ventures were launched or modified. Relationships were altered, strengthened, or tested. The letter's simple words had orchestrated complex human activity, demonstrating the profound influence of written communication in shaping history at a personal scale. Reflection followed action. The recipient contemplated the letter's role in life's unfolding drama. Chance, preparation, and choice intersected. The letter had acted as a fulcrum, pivoting existence in directions both anticipated and unforeseen. Its presence transformed mundane routines into a series of deliberate steps to a new future. The community, too, recognized the impact of the letter. Stories circulated about the change it initiated. Lessons about readiness, attention, and interpretation spread. People considered the possibility that one document, arriving unexpectedly, could restructure social and personal networks, economic trajectories, and emotional landscapes. Time, once linear and predictable, became elastic. The moment of receipt, the days of action, and the unfolding consequences created a dense sequence of experience. The letter's power was in compression. A single afternoon's attention led to months or years of transformation. Lives were redirected, ambitions recalibrated, and priorities redefined. Ultimately, the letter that changed everything exemplified the potency of communication, the fragility of routine, and the human capacity for adaptation. It revealed how a few carefully chosen words could command action, inspire reflection, and reconfigure the ordinary into something extraordinary. For the recipient, the letter was both a challenge and an opportunity, a symbol of chance and agency, and a reminder that life could pivot on a single, unexpected message. In the end, life resumed along new paths. The letter's initial impact became part of history, woven into memory, habit, and legacy. Decisions made in its wake shaped futures, influenced others, and set patterns that would endure long after the envelope had been discarded. The letter remained a testament to the idea that sometimes, in a single afternoon, everything can change.
The notion of selling a life in one afternoon sounds almost unreal, but for some, it was a literal reality. In mid-19th century America, the pressures of poverty, debt, and survival could force a person to make unimaginable decisions. One afternoon, under the weight of circumstance, a life could be traded, auctioned, or pledged in ways that would alter every future that depended on it. This is the story of such an afternoon, a moment in time that reshaped everything for those involved. The town was small, dusty, and alive with murmurs of opportunity and misfortune. Its streets were crowded with merchants, families, laborers, and the occasional traveler. News traveled fast in such places. Someone had fallen ill, a business had failed, a claim had gone unpaid, and in this atmosphere, the sale was announced. A human life, not figuratively, but in the sense of labor, debt, and obligation. Spectators gathered, curiosity and judgment mingling in equal measure. The person whose life was on offer understood the gravity of the moment. They had worked, struggled, and endured, but circumstances had made continuation impossible without external intervention. Debt collectors, creditors, and legal authorities formed a backdrop, reminding everyone that money had power over survival, that contracts could define destiny, and that an afternoon could seal fate. Buyers were varied. Some sought laborers from mines, fields, or households. Others wanted apprentices, servants, or companions. Offers were made, evaluated, and rejected with swift practicality. Conversations were formal, often cruelly transactional. The person being sold listened, weighed, and calculated, each bid a potential path, each rejection a narrowing of possibilities. Time moved differently on such afternoons. Minutes stretched, hearts pounded, and breaths were held in anticipation. Every gesture, word, and expression carried weight. The community watched, some with sympathy, others with expectation. Rumors of similar events had circulated before, but witnessing it firsthand transformed abstraction into reality. A life, once private and continuous, became commodity and spectacle. Payment was never simple. Negotiations involved not only money, but also conditions, duration of service, location, responsibilities, and provisions. Legal formalities were sometimes hastily scribbled or enforced with minimal oversight. Those who bought a life assumed authority, while those who sold or pledged it surrendered autonomy. It was a moment of exchange that affected both body and soul, a social contract enforced by circumstance rather than fairness. The psychological weight was immense. The afternoon stretched as negotiations continued. Each offer reminded the person of vulnerability. Each refusal emphasized desperation. Friends or family nearby could only watch, unable to intervene beyond moral support or quiet advice. The public nature of the sale amplified pressure, turning necessity into performance, struggle into drama. Once a buyer was settled upon, the transfer was immediate. Papers were signed, hands shaken, and arrangements clarified. The person's future was now contingent on new authority, new rules, and new expectations. The crowd dispersed, leaving behind the echoes of decision, whispers of judgment, and the invisible imprint of an afternoon that changed a life forever. Survival required adaptation. The purchased life involved labor, obedience, and often a suppression of past identity. The person learned new routines, acquired unfamiliar skills, and navigated hierarchies with caution. Resistance was dangerous. Compliance was a survival strategy. Yet within the constraints, moments of agency persisted. Small choices, Personal pride and the pursuit of dignity became quiet acts of rebellion against the circumstances. Families of those involved bore their own burdens. Loss of autonomy, separation, and societal judgment weighed heavily. Children, siblings, and spouses confronted the reality that survival sometimes necessitated sacrifice, and that the structures of society left little room for moral or ethical ideals. Their lives were intertwined with the transaction, affected by the decisions made in those critical hours. Time, once measured by sunrise and sunset, work and rest, took on new meaning. The afternoon had condensed lifetimes of hardship, negotiation, and fear into a single window of decision. Reflection on what had been gained or lost could only begin after the fact, once the immediacy of survival passed. Memory preserved the urgency, the tension, and the moral complexity of the exchange. The practice, harsh as it seems, was part of a larger social and economic framework. Credit, debt, labor scarcity, and societal structures allowed such transactions to occur. While the modern mind recoils, historical context reveals how necessity, law, and human ambition intersected. Survival, rather than ethics, often guided behavior, and a single afternoon could resolve crises that had built over years. In the aftermath, life continued with new parameters. The person adapted, learned, and endured. Communities moved on, rumors faded, and the market of human labor recalibrated. Yet the memory of that afternoon endured, a reminder of fragility, endurance, and the human capacity to confront impossible circumstances. The story of selling a life in one afternoon is a testament to resilience, adaptation, and the complex interplay of choice, necessity, and societal structure. It illuminates the ways in which individuals navigated impossible circumstances, how communities observed and judged, and how survival could demand decisions that challenged morality, ethics, and personal dignity. It is a moment that compressed time, risk, and consequence into a single, unforgettable day. Ultimately, the sale was more than a transaction. It was a turning point, a pivot upon which future days, decisions, and relationships depended. The person who lived through it carried the mark, learned the lessons, and navigated the world with a blend of caution, courage, and resilience. The afternoon closed, but its consequences echoed across years, shaping identity, destiny, and the understanding of human endurance in the face of necessity.
The journey westward in the 19th century offered travelers three distinct paths, each with its own perils, promises, and consequences. One could brave the oceans, endure the rugged overland trail, or take the route through Panama's isthmus. Every choice demanded courage, patience, and a willingness to gamble on luck. These were the three roads west, and each shaped the lives of those who dared to follow them. The sea route promised distance, danger, and drama. Ships left crowded eastern ports laden with supplies, families, and the hope of fortune. The voyage was long, measured in weeks and months, and governed by winds, tides, and storms. Passengers endured cramped quarters, salty air, and the constant threat of disease. Storms could appear without warning, tossing vessels like toys, testing endurance and faith. Hunger gnawed as provisions spoiled, and tempers flared among strangers thrust together for survival. Yet the ocean route also offered the promise of relative safety from the overland perils, and the possibility of arriving in California largely intact. The overland trail was a crucible of endurance. Families packed wagons with all they could carry, their belongings stacked and balanced with care. Oxen, mules, and horses were harnessed to carts that creaked under weight and strain. Trails crossed deserts, mountains, and rivers where miscalculations could mean disaster. dust storms, flash floods, and sudden snowstorms tested even the hardiest travelers. Every day demanded labor, navigation, and vigilance. Illness, injury, and conflict shadowed the path. Yet the overland journey offered autonomy, a tangible connection to the land, and a gradual mastery over the terrain. The Panama route was a compromise between speed and risk. Travelers sailed to the isthmus, crossed dense jungles, and embarked on ships to California's coast. This route promised a shorter journey, but it was far from easy. Heat, disease, and insects posed deadly threats. Muddy trails and river crossings slowed progress. Travelers encountered both the promise of the sea and the perils of the jungle. Many underestimated the tropical hardships, only to find that the land itself could be as lethal as any storm or desert crossing. Choice dictated destiny. Wealth, health, experience, and social standing influenced decisions. Some could afford the ocean voyage, while others risked the trail. Some sought speed, hoping the Panama shortcut would spare them months of labor and exposure. Every choice carried consequences that would ripple through lives, shaping fortunes, families, and futures. Life on the ocean route combined monotony with terror. Days drifted by under relentless sun or endless gray clouds. Ships pitched and rolled, water sloshed into barrels and bunks, and seasickness left many weakened. Storms could erupt suddenly, waves breaking over decks, masts straining against wind. Crew and passengers alike labored together to navigate disaster. Hunger, fatigue, and fear defined daily life. And yet land on the horizon brought relief, anticipation, and renewed hope. On the overland trail, every sunrise brought both labor and risk. Wagons creaked along rugged tracks, oxen stumbled in the dust, and rivers required ingenuity to cross. Families cooked over fires, tended animals, and repaired equipment. Nights offered respite, but they were never safe. Travelers whispered prayers for protection, patched broken wheels, and guarded supplies from theft or wildlife. Children adapted quickly, learning the ways of survival as adults did, often stepping into responsibilities far beyond their years. The Panama route demanded a different kind of fortitude. Travelers endured tropical heat, heavy rain, and swarms of insects. Dense jungle slowed progress. Disease, particularly malaria and yellow fever, claimed lives at alarming rates. River crossings tested ingenuity and courage. Even after traversing the isthmus, travelers faced the ocean again, completing the final leg of a perilous journey. Success depended not only on resilience, but on luck, timing, and coordination. Social hierarchies emerged differently along each route. On ships, wealth determined comfort and influence. On trails, experience and leadership dictated authority. In Panama, endurance and health often separated those who survived from those who perished. Communities formed spontaneously, alliances shifted with necessity, and cooperation often became a matter of life and death. Food was a constant concern. Spoiled provisions, scarcity, and unpredictable deliveries challenged travelers at sea and on land alike. Hunting, fishing, and foraging supplemented rations on trails. Along Panama, local supplies could be scarce or expensive. Meals became both sustenance and morale boosters, reminding travelers of home and providing temporary comfort. Arrival in California marked the end of one journey and the beginning of another. Travelers were tested physically, mentally, and spiritually. Some reached the promised land intact, rich in experience or wealth. Others arrived broken, sick, or empty-handed. Every story reflected a combination of choice, endurance, and chance. The land itself was generous yet demanding, offering opportunity that required effort, skill, and courage to seize. The three roads west illustrate the complexity of migration, the intersection of risk and reward, and the human desire to pursue dreams despite uncertainty. Each path carried its own lessons, shaping character, community, and history. Time on the ocean, the trail, or through Panama measured not just miles, but resilience. Luck dictated success as much as determination, and every traveler carried the imprint of their route, forever marked by storms weathered, deserts crossed, or jungles endured. History remembers the settlers who arrived, the towns built, and the fortunes made, yet it often overlooks the hardships endured, the choices weighed, and the countless lives altered along the way. The three roads west remain a testament to human courage and ambition, a reminder that opportunity is inseparable from challenge, and that every journey, no matter what the path, shapes those who dare to take it. The journey westward was not only measured in miles, but in nights spent under the stars, beside rattling wagons and weary oxen. Each evening brought dust, prayers, and broken wheels, a triad that defined life on the trail. Travelers left behind the familiar, stepping into uncertainty with families, goods, and dreams piled into wagons that creaked under the weight of ambition. These nights were a crucible where hope, endurance, and fear intertwined. As the sun set over plains and hills, dust settled like a thin veil over exhausted travelers. The day's exertions left sweat-streaked faces, aching muscles, and parched throats. Fires were lit with trembling hands, smoke drifting into the dusky sky. Meals, often simple, were shared silently. The wind carried both the scent of earth and the distant echoes of other wagons. In the stillness, travelers whispered prayers, requests for safety, for speed, for strength to endure the next day. Broken wheels were inevitable companions. Rocks, ruts, and roots punished every axle. Repairs were laborious, done by tired hands in fading light. Blacksmiths were scarce, ingenuity became essential. Families and neighbors gathered to lift wagons, mend wheels, and carry loads across rough patches. The work was communal, yet exhausting. Nights often extended long past darkness as repairs delayed rest and the trail continued to demand attention. Prayer accompanied every night. Families isolated in vast landscapes sought divine protection. Some whispered quietly, others spoke aloud, invoking saints or ancestors. Faith was a shield against uncertainty, a source of courage when supplies ran low or storms threatened. Prayers were practical and spiritual, asking not only for deliverance, but also for endurance, clarity, and resilience. The trail itself was unpredictable. Dust storms could rise suddenly, reducing visibility and choking travelers. Thunderheads could gather without warning, bringing wind and rain that turned the earth to mud. Rivers swelled, and crossings became dangerous gambles. The night did not always offer reprieve. Travelers learned to be vigilant, to watch both stars and shadows, to anticipate hazards that could undo hours of labor. Camaraderie was forged in shared hardship. Wagon trains became temporary families. Neighbors depended on each other for knowledge of the terrain, assistance with animals, and emotional support. Stories of past misfortunes circulated, teaching caution and inspiring resilience. Laughter could punctuate tense nights, but the underlying anxiety never fully dissipated. Children were both observers and participants. They carried water, fed animals, and learned the rhythms of the trail from an early age. Stories told by elders, lessons in navigation and survival, and daily chores shaped them into the next generation of travelers. Nights offered both rest and education, as lessons were conveyed under starlight and the constant hum of nocturnal wildlife. Food was simple and often rationed. Beans, hardtack, Salted meat and occasionally fresh produce formed meals. Fires cooked what little could be managed, and meals became a communal ritual. Hunger sharpened senses and tempers alike. A poor meal or spoiled supplies could dampen morale, while a successful day's hunt or foraging brought relief, however temporary. Sleep was scarce and fitful. The creak of wagons, the lowing of oxen, and the distant howl of coyotes penetrated tents and bedding. Exhaustion was inevitable, but so was vigilance. The trail was never fully safe. Encounters with wild animals, rough terrain, and weather required constant attention, even during the night. Travelers learned to rest lightly, ready to arise at the first warning of danger. As night deepened, reflection became inevitable. Travelers considered the distance covered, the challenges overcome, and the unknown that lay ahead. Letters from home were read or imagined. Hopes and fears were revisited. The journey was more than physical, it was psychological, testing patience, resolve, and faith. In winter or summer, in rain or shine, wagon nights shared common threads. The elements shaped experience, demanding endurance and adaptability. Communities adapted, tents were reinforced, fires maintained, animals cared for, and each traveler learned to anticipate needs before they became emergencies. Preparation and observation were survival skills as vital as strength and stamina. Ultimately, wagon nights were lessons in humility. They revealed the limits of human control and the importance of community, ingenuity, and patience. Travelers learned that progress was never guaranteed, that the trail required sacrifice, and that endurance often mattered more than ambition. By the time the sun rose and the dust settled, wagons moved forward again, carrying people, supplies, and fragile dreams. Each morning was a renewal, a chance to continue despite setbacks, storms, and broken wheels. Nights under stars were a crucible, shaping individuals and communities, instilling wisdom and forging resilience. The journey west, marked by dust, prayers, and broken wheels, left an indelible imprint. Those who survived carried the experience into new lands with strength, humility, and stories to guide future travelers. Wagon nights were not mere pauses in a journey. They were defining moments, shaping character, testing courage, and measuring life in endurance, faith, and hope.
The ocean route to California was a path paved with uncertainty, endurance, and hope. For those unable or unwilling to traverse the vast plains, deserts, and mountains of the overland trail, ships offered an alternative. Ports and harbors became starting points of a journey that was as merciless as it was promising. To leave home for the ocean was to surrender to the vastness of water, to trade the known dangers of land for the unpredictable fury of the sea. This is the story of the ocean route, of storms that tested courage, hunger that tested resolve, and hope that fueled every mile. Preparation began months before departure. Families liquidated possessions, merchants prepared supplies, ships were fitted with provisions meant to last weeks or months. Travelers packed clothing, tools, letters, and dreams. They boarded at bustling ports where excitement mingled with fear. The ocean route was longer, more expensive, but for many it was a safer bet than the overland trek. Yet safety was an illusion. Storms, disease, and scarcity shadowed every voyage. Once at sea, the journey's rhythm was dictated by the wind, the currents, and the whim of storms. Days blended into nights under sails that strained against gusts, under skies that shifted from placid blue to threatening gray. Waves towered, ships pitched and rolled, and the horizon seemed endless. Seasickness and fatigue drained travelers even before the first challenge of hunger appeared.
Survival required not only endurance, but a willingness to trust in navigation, in crew skill, and in fortune. Food was a constant concern. Ships carried dried meats, hardtack, rice, and beans, along with water stored in barrels that quickly turned stale. Rations were strictly enforced. Spoiled provisions led to illness, and illness threatened the weak and young first. Travelers learned to ration not just food, but hope. Every meal became an event of careful calculation and measured gratitude. Storms were the ultimate equalizer. Squalls could arise without warning, bending masts, tearing sails, and filling decks with water. Crews bottled winds while passengers clung to ropes or railings. Waves could toss small boats overboard, and lightning struck indiscriminately. Survival depended on luck as much as skill. For some, the first storm was a test that hardened resolve. For others, it was the beginning of unending fear. Days without land challenged minds as much as bodies. Travelers longed for sight of coastline, for signs of harbor, for any indication that the voyage was nearing its end. Seasickness persisted. Fatigue pressed against hope. Stories circulated about pirates, hidden shoals, and shipwrecks, amplifying anxiety. Conversations often centered around what awaited them in California: gold, prosperity, a new life. That vision kept the heart steady while the body weakened. The ship became a microcosm of society. Crews worked in shifts, maintaining the vessel, steering through storms, repairing damage. Passengers learned roles and hierarchies quickly. Wealth, skill, and fortitude determined influence. Disputes arose over space, provisions, and perceived injustices. Cooperation was necessary. Survival depended on it. Those unable to adapt faced exhaustion, illness, or isolation. Disease haunted the ocean route. Typhoid, scurvy, and fever struck with terrifying speed. Limited medical knowledge and cramped quarters amplified every outbreak. Sick passengers relied on crew for care, often in fear rather than trust. The mortality rate, though not universally catastrophic, was high enough to remind everyone of the ocean's indifference. Hope remained the constant anchor. Every morning, travelers scanned the horizon, imagining the Californian coast. Letters written during the voyage expressed ambition, anxiety, and expectation. Dreams of gold, land, and opportunity filled conversations and private thoughts alike. Even as storms battered ships and hunger gnawed at bellies, hope sustained hearts. It was both motivation and shield. Arrival at Californian ports was a revelation. Sailors and passengers alike caught their first glimpse of land after weeks at sea. The mountains, the harbors, the greenery, everything was larger, more promising than maps could convey. Yet the joy of sighting land was tempered by the knowledge that work had just begun. Disembarkation led to chaos. Lines for passage through customs, towns filled with laborers seeking supplies, and the start of a new challenge, reaching claims or settlements inland. The ocean route was never a journey in isolation. News from the East and Europe arrived slowly. Letters carried expectations, and miscommunications led to disappointment or despair. Travelers quickly learned that success required not only endurance at sea, but initiative upon landing. The land demanded labor, adaptation, and luck, just as the ocean had. Over time, stories of survival and loss circulated. Families spoke of storms weathered, meals stretched, and comradeship formed in shared hardship. Some arrived with fortune or foresight, securing claims, establishing businesses, or joining communities. Others arrived broken, sick, or empty-handed, their expectations unmet, but their courage tested. The ocean route teaches a lesson in patience, resilience, and perspective. Every storm and hardship revealed limits and capacities. Hunger clarified priorities. Hope propelled action.
Survival became an achievement in itself, independent of wealth gained. Travelers returned with memories, scars, and stories that would define them as much as any gold nugget ever could. In the end, the ocean route was more than a passage to California. It was a crucible. It shaped character, tested faith, and measured resolve. Time on the water was governed not by clocks, but by wind, wave, and fortune. Luck became as important as strength, and hope was the only constant. For those who arrived, the land was the reward, but the journey itself, the storms, the hunger, the endurance, became the defining experience.
When weary travelers crested the final hill or rounded the bend in the river, the first sight of California often took their breath away. The land stretched endlessly, golden under the sun, mountains in the distance, valleys glimmering like liquid gold. Rivers wound through fertile plains, and the air carried the scent of pine, wildflowers, and opportunity. For many, it was a vision that had existed in letters, maps, and imagination for years, sometimes decades. And yet, seeing it with one's own eyes was an affirmation that hope had a shape, a color, a weight. The journey to this land was long, treacherous, and uncertain. Families crossed deserts, navigated mountain passes, and traveled rivers that refused to be tamed. They faced disease, starvation, exposure, and exhaustion. They lost companions and livestock. They endured blizzards and heat that scorched skin and sapped strength. Through it all, the vision of California remained a promise that kept them moving, step by agonizing step. It was the idea of the land, as much as the land itself, that propelled them forward. As travelers descended into valleys and approached settlements, the reality of California became apparent. Gold was rumored in the rivers and streams. Fertile soil promised crops, and the climate seemed forgiving. Native peoples, whose lands were increasingly encroached upon, observed these newcomers with wary eyes. Spanish missions, remnants of another era, dotted the landscape. Small towns and trading posts offered glimpses of civilization. The promise of the land carried both hope and challenge. The first encounters with rivers were transformative. Clear, cold, and rushing with life, the waters were a source of sustenance and a measure of luck. Panning for gold became a daily ritual. Shovels, pans, and sluices became extensions of the hands. Some found flecks of promise almost immediately. Others worked for days without a single reward. Luck, more than skill, often determined the fate of a miner. Time in California felt elastic. Hours could pass unnoticed in the search for fortune, and weeks might vanish in the heat of hope and exhaustion. Life in the early settlements reflected the urgency of the gold rush. Saloons and stores sprang up overnight, catering to the needs and vices of the hopeful. Wagons creaked under the weight of supplies, while horses and mules labored tirelessly. The landscape became crowded with tents, shanties, and cabins, each representing a story, a hope, a gamble. Communities formed rapidly, often lacking rules beyond what necessity dictated, and conflicts over land, water, and claims were frequent. Yet California offered more than gold. Fertile valleys yielded crops that could feed families and towns. Pines and redwoods provided timber for construction. Opportunities emerged for merchants, teachers, and women who sought work beyond the mines. Artisans and laborers arrived to build infrastructure. Schools and churches gradually formed. Life, though rough and uncertain, began to take shape around the promise of the land. The environment was both a blessing and a test. Earthquakes, fires, and sudden storms reminded settlers that this paradise was unpredictable. Valleys could flood, mountains could slide, and the summer sun could scorch crops and livestock. Survivors learned resilience. Those who adapted survived. Those who could not faded into obscurity or death. The land offered a promise, but it exacted a toll. For travelers arriving from the east or from distant shores, California challenged assumptions. Skills honed on farms or in cities did not always translate. Negotiation, endurance, and improvisation became crucial. The promise of opportunity was not enough without the ability to navigate uncertainty and competition. Communities formed rules, enforced by custom, necessity, or sometimes violence, shaping who could claim wealth and who could be excluded. Despite hardships, the first sight of California left an indelible mark on those who arrived. It represented possibility, freedom, and reinvention. Dreams crystallized into tangible goals. Men and women imagined homes, businesses, and a future unbound by past limitations. Children who had grown up hearing of the West finally understood the scale and beauty of what they had been promised. As weeks and months passed, the reality of the land tempered dreams with labor. Mining consumed time and energy. Crops required constant attention, and settlements demanded maintenance. Yet the promise remained. Letters sent back east exaggerated success, emphasizing opportunity over struggle. Tales of fortune inspired others to undertake the grueling journey, perpetuating a cycle of hope and hardship. The first sight of California was not only a physical event, but an emotional one. Relief, awe, and anticipation mingled with fear, fatigue, and doubt. Travelers recognized that arrival was only the beginning. The land offered a canvas upon which to build a life, but it demanded courage, endurance, and often sacrifice. Those who thrived in California combined luck, skill, and adaptability. They built communities, infrastructure, and businesses. They cultivated land and forged social networks. Others perished quietly or left after failing to secure their place. Every life reflected the duality of the land, promise and challenge, beauty and danger, opportunity and cost. In the end, California lived up to its promises in both tangible and intangible ways. It reshaped individuals, families, and nations. It offered wealth, yes, but also transformation, testing the limits of human endurance and imagination. For every fortune made, there were countless trials endured. For every success story, there were untold struggles and sacrifices. The first sight of California remains a symbol of hope, ambition, and the human capacity to pursue dreams. But it is also a reminder that every promise comes with a price, and that the land which looks like a paradise can demand as much as it offers. Time in California was measured not in hours, but in opportunity seized, labor endured, and dreams pursued relentlessly. And for those who arrived, that first view, the golden valleys, the towering mountains, the winding rivers, was a moment that could never be forgotten.
In the heart of the American West, where rivers twisted through rocky valleys and mountains rose jagged against the sky, the mining camps emerged. They were small, temporary towns built on hope, speculation, and the promise of gold. Life in these camps was unpredictable, violent, and often exhausting. Every day, men measured their fortunes not by clocks, but by the luck that the land seemed to favor or deny. This is the story of those camps, places where time was measured in luck, not hours, and where every man's fate depended on more than effort alone. The arrival at a mining camp was always chaotic. Wagons carried families and belongings across rough trails, leaving behind the familiar for the unknown. Dust clung to clothing and hair. Rivers had to be crossed with makeshift bridges. As soon as the camp came into view, men and women evaluated it at a glance. Some saw opportunity, others risk. Tents and shacks were hastily erected, fires were lit,
Tools were sharpened. Rumors of gold guided every decision. Life in the camp had a rhythm, but it was irregular. The day began at sunrise, but sunrise mattered little. Work started when men felt the need, when the sun warmed the soil enough to pan, when water was low enough to reveal the glittering flakes. Hours stretched into endless repetition. Some men struck gold early, others worked for days without a glimmer. Luck was impartial and cruel. Food was scarce and expensive. Merchants traveled great distances to supply the miners, and prices reflected the scarcity. A loaf of bread might cost as much as a day's labor. Beans, salted pork, and coffee were staples. Meals were communal, eaten hastily between shifts at the river or the sluice box. Hunger sharpened temper and dulled judgment. Man became desperate, willing to gamble for even a small advantage. The social hierarchy of a mining camp was fluid but brutal. Reputation mattered. Men who found even a small nugget of gold earned respect. Others were ridiculed, ignored, or sometimes attacked. Rumors spread quickly that one man had found a vein, that another had cheated in a claim. Violence was common. Disputes over land or water rights could escalate to gunfire in minutes. Law was sparse. The camp itself enforced order, often violently. Disease and injury were constant threats. The work was backbreaking and dangerous. Slips, falls, and tool accidents were common. Illnesses spread quickly in cramped quarters with poor sanitation. Cholera, dysentery, and infections claimed more lives than accidents. Medicine was rudimentary. Survival depended on toughness, endurance, and sometimes sheer luck. Many men in the camps were immigrants. Chinese, Mexican, and European miners sought opportunity, but often faced discrimination. They were assigned the hardest tasks, charged extra for supplies, and attacked during disputes. Despite the hostility, they contributed essential labor, built infrastructure, and maintained the flow of resources. Their presence was vital, yet their victories were rarely celebrated. Women played a quiet but crucial role. They cooked, cleaned, tended the sick, and managed the camp's logistics. Their work stabilized life in the chaos. They raised children, negotiated with merchants, and provided a semblance of order in a world ruled by chance. Yet their labor was rarely acknowledged, overshadowed by the glimmer of gold and the exploits of men. Evening brought temporary relief. Fires were lit, stories were exchanged, and songs rose into the night air. Men drank, celebrated small victories, mourned losses, and prepared for the next day. Shadows of the mountains grew long, and the camp settled into an uneasy calm. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of gold, greed, and survival. Luck continued to govern life in subtle ways. The weather could destroy a claim in hours, rain could flood the riverbeds, and frost could harden the soil beyond panning. A single lucky strike could make a man rich, while months of effort could yield nothing. Men learned to read the land, to observe water flow, soil color, and rock composition, but the final verdict always belonged to fortune. Time in the mining camp was elastic. Days stretched endlessly for the unlucky and passed in a blur for the fortunate. The camp itself seemed timeless, a liminal space where the outside world, the cities, farms, and laws had little influence. News arrived slowly, letters were rare, and the connection to home was tenuous. The camp existed in its own rhythm, dictated by nature, labor, and luck. As weeks turned into months, some miners struck it rich. Small claims became significant veins. Others found nothing but exhaustion. Men left the camp in frustration or in search of better opportunities elsewhere. Some stayed, clinging to hope that luck might turn in their favor. The camps evolved,
shrank, and sometimes disappeared altogether, leaving behind only dust, charred wood, and stories whispered to the wind. The mining camp was a place of contradictions. It was both community and isolation, hope and despair, wealth and ruin. Men measured time by chance, their fortunes by what luck delivered or withheld. Bodies were spent, families separated, and lives changed permanently. Yet the dream of striking gold sustained them, kept them working, and drew new souls to the rivers and valleys year after year. In the end, the gold that was found was often not enough to compensate for the cost. Health, relationships, and even sanity was sacrificed on the altar of opportunity. Some returned home richer, others broke, and many were changed forever. The camps were temporary, but their imprint remained in the land, in memory, and in the lives of those who dared to try. Mining camps taught a lesson that was repeated across the West, that time was not measured in hours or days, but in moments of fortune and misfortune, in glimmers of hope and flashes of despair. Luck was the true currency, and the measure of success was often beyond human control. Those who survived, whether rich or poor, carried the mark of the camp in their bodies, their stories, and their dreams. And so, the mining camp endures in history as a place where the human spirit was tested, where resilience and chance intertwined, and where time itself bent to the whims of the land and the unpredictable hand of fate. It is a reminder that for every man who struck gold, countless others labored in shadow, and that the true measure of life in the West was not wealth, but endurance, courage, and the unpredictable rhythm of luck.
Gold arrived in America like a whisper that turned into a roar. It shimmered in riverbeds and newspapers alike, transforming ordinary land into sacred ground and ordinary men into believers. It promised escape from debt, anonymity, and limits. It suggested that a single discovery could redeem a lifetime of struggle. But gold was never just a gift. For every fortune it created, it demanded payment in time, in health, in families broken apart, and in lives quietly erased from memory. What it gave with one hand, it took with the other, often more carefully, more completely. This is the story of that cost, the story of the gold that took more than it gave. The first sight of gold was almost always understated, a flash in moving water, a weight in a pan that felt different from stone, a color that refused to disappear when the dirt washed away. Men froze when they saw it, breath caught, hands trembled. Time narrowed to a single moment that seemed to hold every future at once. That first glimmer did not make anyone rich, but it changed them forever. Gold demanded commitment before it offered reward. Men left farms half-planted, shops were locked without notice, letters went unanswered, families accepted absence without knowing its length. The decision to chase gold was rarely framed as abandonment. It was framed as sacrifice, a short separation for a long gain. Months turned into years. The gold did not hurry. Mining was labor without mercy. Days were spent bent over water or rock, repeating the same motion until muscles failed and joints stiffened permanently. Hands cracked and bled, backs curved unnaturally, knees wore down. Injuries were common, healing was rare. A broken arm or crushed foot could end a man's chance entirely. Without work, there was no income. Without income, there was no place in camp life. Gold rewarded endurance. It consumed bodies quietly. Food was expensive where gold was plentiful.
Prices rose faster than wages. A simple meal could cost a day's earnings. Supplies arrived slowly and spoiled quickly. Men learned to ration even when they struck something promising. Hunger sharpened tempers. It weakened judgment. Gold glittered nearby, unreachable, while stomachs remained empty. Gold encouraged the belief that success was earned through effort alone. Men worked longer hours, dug deeper, and blamed themselves when nothing appeared. Failure felt personal, even when chance governed everything. This illusion was powerful. It kept people digging long after logic suggested leaving. To quit was to admit not just defeat, but inadequacy. Gold turned chance into shame. Those who found gold rarely kept it. Money vanished into supplies, tools, and drink. Saloons waited patiently for optimism. Merchants adjusted prices instantly. A man might discover wealth in the morning and lose it by nightfall. Gold passed through hands faster than it accumulated. Very few carried it home. Back east, families waited. Letters arrived irregularly, carrying hope, exaggeration, and silence between lines. Wives managed farms and children alone. Parents aged without sons nearby. Some families survived separation, others did not. Gold did not account for absence. Women bore the cost without sharing the myth. Some followed men west only to find hardship instead of security. Others stayed behind, living in prolonged uncertainty. In mining towns, women worked endlessly, cooking, cleaning, teaching, caring, transforming chaos into something survivable. Their labor stabilized what gold destabilized. History rarely counted that cost. Gold sharpened conflict. Claims were defended aggressively. Disputes escalated quickly. Law arrived late, if at all. Racial violence became routine. Chinese, indigenous, and Latin American miners were pushed aside, taxed unfairly, or driven out entirely. Gold enriched exclusion. The land absorbed blood along with ambition. Gold reshaped the earth violently. Rivers were diverted, hillsides collapsed, forests disappeared. Hydraulic mining tore landscapes apart, leaving scars that lasted generations. The land paid its price up front. Recovery would take centuries. Even those who left survived imperfectly, lungs damaged by dust, hearing dulled by constant noise, limbs weakened by strain. Gold did not fund medical recovery. Men returned older than their years, carrying damage no fortune could reverse. Eventually, most miners reached the same moment, the quiet understanding that the gold would not come. Some recognized it early and left. Others stayed until hope thinned into habit. Leaving felt like failure. Staying felt like surrender. Gold did give something. It accelerated settlement. It built cities. It attracted labor and innovation. But it did not distribute rewards evenly. For most, it gave experience rather than wealth, hard lessons, endurance, a story that ended without triumph. Over time, the cost faded from popular memory. Gold Rush stories focused on success, not on survival, on winners, not the thousands who returned empty-handed or not at all. Myth softened the damage. History simplified suffering. Gold was never free. It demanded youth, health, patience, and love. It asked for belief first and payment later. Those who paid most received least. The true cost of gold cannot be measured in ounces. It is measured in missed childhoods, broken bodies, erased communities, and landscapes permanently altered. Gold built a future for a nation, but it did so by consuming countless individual futures along the way. In the end,
The greatest legacy of the gold rush is not the wealth it created, but the reminder that it left behind, that some promises shine brightest only before they are touched, and that the gold which gives everything rarely keeps anything at all.
America has always told its stories through dreams. Dreams of land, of gold, of freedom, of becoming someone new in a place that promised reinvention. During the great westward rushes of the 19th century, these dreams grew louder, brighter, and more convincing. Newspapers celebrated opportunity. Letters spoke of endless possibility. Maps suggested space without limits. But every dream has edges, and beyond those edges lived the people rarely mentioned in triumphal stories, the ones who worked, suffered, endured, and disappeared without reward. While some chased fortune and a few achieved it, many more were pushed aside, exploited, were erased entirely. This is their story, the story of the people left out of the dream. Long before wagons rolled west or gold shimmered in rivers, the land already had owners. Indigenous nations had lived on, shaped, and understood the terrain for generations. Rivers were not resources to be stripped, but lifelines. Mountains were not obstacles, but relatives. The land was memory itself. Yet the American dream did not include them. Settlers arrived, treaties were written and broken, and reservations shrank. Hunting grounds disappeared, sacred sites were destroyed in the name of progress. Gold discoveries were often followed by military removal. Indigenous communities paid first and paid completely. Displacement was rarely peaceful. Raids, forced marches, and massacres accompanied settlement. Violence was justified as necessary for progress. Losses were labeled collateral. Few records captured indigenous voices. Fewer still recorded grief. The dream expanded, and entire cultures were pushed beyond its borders. Time and opportunity were measured for settlers, not for the people already living there. Generations of knowledge, culture, and tradition were erased in the pursuit of someone else's promise. For Black Americans, the dream was tangled with contradiction. Some were enslaved and forced westward by owners seeking opportunity. Others, newly freed or free-born, traveled hoping distance would offer protection from oppression. Freedom did not guarantee inclusion. Racial laws followed them. Violence followed them. Opportunities promised in theory were denied in practice. The dream spoke of equality, but reality delivered exclusion. Black labor built infrastructure, worked mines, cooked meals, and carried supplies. Yet wages were lower, safety minimal, and recognition absent. When gold was found, credit went elsewhere. The dream borrowed their work, but never offered ownership. Chinese migrants crossed oceans driven by poverty, war, and the promise of opportunity. They arrived willing to endure hardship, to work, to survive. At first, they were tolerated. Then resentment grew. As competition increased, hostility hardened into law. Special taxes targeted Chinese miners. Violence forced entire communities out. Exclusion became official policy. Yet Chinese labor built railroads, maintained camps, and supported local economies. Their work was essential. Their presence was treated as temporary. History recorded the infrastructure, but forgot the hands that built it. Before borders shifted, many Mexican and Latin American miners were already home. The land changed flags, but they did not. New laws redefined them as foreigners overnight. Claims were challenged, rights were revoked, violence enforced exclusion.
The dream did not adjust to their existence, it pushed them out instead. Their experience was a warning that opportunity often had invisible boundaries, and that survival depended on one's place within racial and political hierarchies. Women rarely appear in heroic westward narratives, yet they were everywhere. They cooked, taught, cleaned, healed, and organized, turning chaos into communities that could survive. They raised children in unstable environments and held households together while men chased fortune. Their work did not glitter, so it was ignored. The dream relied on their labor while denying them credit. Indigenous women and women of color faced compounded exclusion, suffering racial violence, gendered exploitation, and legal invisibility. Their resilience rarely became legend. They endured, and yet history forgot. Children followed adults into uncertainty. Some worked instead of learning. Others grew up amid violence and instability. Many lost parents to disease, labor, or conflict. The dream had no provisions for childhood. It demanded adulthood too early, forcing innocence to bend to survival. Environmental destruction, flooded lands, poisoned rivers, stripped forests did not affect everyone equally. The wealthy extracted, the poor endured the aftermath. The dream polluted quietly, leaving suffering that was invisible in official records. Legal systems were not neutral arbiters of justice. Courts validated dispossession, militias enforced exclusion. Law became a gatekeeper, ensuring that only certain groups could access the dream. Those excluded paid in blood, labor, and erasure. Silence in historical records amplified their absence. History prefers simplicity. It highlights winners and compresses suffering into footnotes. The people left out of the dream appear briefly, if at all. Their absence is not accidental. It is part of the story itself. Yet the exclusion was not meaningless. The American West was built not only by ambition, but by omission. Prosperity required inequality. Expansion required displacement. The dream succeeded because it did not include everyone. To remember honestly is uncomfortable. It complicates pride. It challenges myth, but it restores humanity to those erased. The labor, loss, and survival of the marginalized made the dream possible for others. Honoring them reveals the true cost of expansion and opportunity. The people left out of the dream were not failures, they were foundations. They labored, endured, and survived in a system that offered them little and took much. Their contributions built towns, infrastructure, and communities that would benefit those who were celebrated in history. Their sacrifices were invisible, their triumphs unrecorded, and their pain unacknowledged. Without them, the narrative of success would collapse, for the dream relied on their exclusion as much as it relied on ambition. To tell their story is not to reject the dream, but to finally see its full cost. It is to understand that progress often comes with a price paid silently, a labor uncredited, a life remembered only in fragments. Inclusion is not a simple act. It is a conscious choice that history rarely made. The American dream, as it unfolded in the West, was selective. But the people left out of the dream remind us that every foundation is built upon those who were not celebrated, that every story has shadows that shape it, and that true understanding comes from seeing both the light and the darkness together. History can learn from absence as much as from triumph. In remembering the people left out, we honor resilience, creativity, endurance, and humanity. We acknowledge that the land carried more than ambition. It carried memory, loss, and lives that mattered. The West was more than opportunity. It was a test of who could survive, who could endure, and who could be erased without notice. And in the silent labor of those left out, the story of America itself finds its hidden heartbeat. The dream continues to be told, often in simplified forms, often highlighting the winners, but the invisible voices remain. They whisper in riverbeds, in towns built on erased land, in traditions maintained quietly. They teach that opportunity is never universal, that progress often comes at the cost of someone else's survival, and that the true measure of a dream lies in how many are included, not just how many succeed. To honor them is to tell the whole story, to see the edges, the boundaries, and the sacrifices that made the dream possible for others.
America has always told its stories through dreams. Dreams of land, gold, freedom, and reinvention. The West promised a new beginning for anyone willing to endure the journey, to risk everything, to leave behind familiarity. But dreams have edges, and beyond those edges lived the people who rarely appeared in triumphant stories, the ones who labored, suffered, and disappeared without reward. While some chased fortune and a few achieved it, many were pushed aside, exploited, or erased entirely. This is the story of the people left out of the dream. Long before wagons rolled west or gold shimmered in rivers, the land already had owners. Indigenous nations had lived, farmed, hunted, and built communities for generations. Rivers were not resources to be mined, but lifelines. Mountains were not obstacles, but relatives. The land was memory itself. Yet the American dream did not include them. Settlers arrived, treaties were written and broken, and reservations shrank. Hunting grounds disappeared, sacred sites were destroyed in the name of progress. Gold discoveries were often followed by military removal. Indigenous communities paid first, and paid completely. Displacement was rarely peaceful. Raids, forced marches, and massacres accompanied settlement. Violence was justified as necessary for progress. Losses were labeled collateral damage. Few records captured indigenous voices, and fewer still recorded grief. The dream expanded, and entire cultures were pushed beyond its borders. Time and opportunity were measured for settlers, not for the people already living there. Generations of knowledge, culture, and tradition were erased in the pursuit of someone else's promise. For Black Americans, the dream was tangled with contradiction. Some were enslaved and forced westward by owners seeking opportunity. Others, newly freed or free-born, traveled hoping that distance would offer protection from oppression. Freedom did not guarantee inclusion. Racial laws followed them. Violence followed them. Opportunities promised in theory were denied in practice. The dream spoke of equality, but reality delivered exclusion. Black labor built infrastructure, worked mines, cooked meals, and carried supplies, yet wages were lower, safety minimal, and recognition absent. When gold was found, credit went elsewhere. The dream borrowed their work, but never offered ownership. Chinese migrants crossed oceans driven by poverty, war, and the promise of opportunity. They arrived willing to endure hardship, to work, to survive. At first, they were tolerated. Then resentment grew. As competition increased, hostility hardened into law. Special taxes targeted Chinese miners. Violence forced entire communities out. Exclusion became official policy. Yet Chinese labor built railroads, maintained camps, and supported local economies. Their work was essential. Their presence was treated as temporary. History recorded the infrastructure, but forgot the hands that built it. Before borders shifted, many Mexican and Latin American miners were already home. The land changed flags, but they did not. New laws redefined them as foreigners overnight. Claims were challenged, rights were revoked. Violence enforced exclusion. The dream did not adjust to their existence. It pushed them out instead. Their experience was a warning that opportunity often had invisible boundaries, and that survival depended on one's place within racial and political hierarchies. Women rarely appear in heroic narratives westward, yet they were everywhere. They cooked, taught, cleaned, healed, and organized, turning chaos into communities that could survive. They raised children in unstable environments and held households together while men chased fortune. Their work did not glitter, so it was ignored. The dream relied on their labor while denying them credit. Indigenous women and women of color faced compounded exclusion, suffering racial violence, gendered exploitation, and legal invisibility. Their resilience rarely became legend. They endured, and yet history forgot. Children followed adults into uncertainty. Some worked instead of learning. Others grew up amid violence and instability. Many lost parents to disease, labor, or conflict. The dream had no provisions for childhood. It demanded adulthood too early, forcing innocence to bend to survival. Environmental destruction, flooded lands, poisoned rivers, stripped forests, did not affect everyone equally. The wealthy extracted, the poor endured the aftermath. The dream polluted quietly, leaving suffering that was invisible in official records. Legal systems were not neutral arbiters of justice. Courts validated dispossession. Militias enforced exclusion. Law became a gatekeeper, ensuring that only certain groups could access the dream. Those excluded paid in blood, labor, and erasure. Silence in historical records amplified their absence. History prefers simplicity. It highlights winners and compresses suffering into footnotes. The people left out of the dream appear briefly, if at all. Their absence is not accidental. It is part of the story itself. Yet the exclusion was not meaningless. The American West was built not only by ambition, but by omission. Prosperity required inequality. Expansion required displacement. The dream succeeded because it did not include everyone. To remember honestly is uncomfortable. It complicates pride. It challenges myth. But it restores humanity to those erased. The labor, loss, and survival of the marginalized made the dream possible for others. Honoring them reveals the true cost of expansion and opportunity. The people left out of the dream were not failures. They were foundations. They labored, endured, and survived in a system that offered them little and took much. Their contributions built towns, infrastructure, and communities that would benefit those who were celebrated in history. Their sacrifices were invisible, their triumphs unrecorded, and their pain unacknowledged. Without them, the narrative of success would collapse, for the dream relied on their exclusion as much as it relied on ambition. To tell their story is not to reject the dream, but to finally see its full cost. It is to understand that progress often comes with a price paid silently, a labor uncredited, a life remembered only in fragments. Inclusion is not a simple act, it is a conscious choice that history rarely made. The American dream,
as it unfolded in the West, was selective. But the people left out of the dream remind us that every foundation is built upon those who were not celebrated, that every story has shadows that shape it, and that true understanding comes from seeing both the light and the darkness together. History can learn from absence as much from triumph. In remembering the people left out, we honor resilience, creativity, endurance, and humanity. We acknowledge that the land carried more than ambition. It carried memory, loss, and lives that mattered. The West was more than opportunity. It was a test of who could survive, who could endure, and who could be erased without notice. And in the silent labor of those left out, the story of America itself finds its hidden heartbeat. The dream continues to be told, often in simplified forms, often highlighting the winners. But the invisible voices remain. They whisper in riverbeds, in towns built on erased land, in traditions maintained quietly. They teach that opportunity is never universal, that progress often comes at the cost of someone else's survival, and that the true measure of a dream lies in how many are included, not just how many succeed. To honor them is to tell the whole story, to see the edges, the boundaries, and the sacrifices that made the dream possible for others.